More than a decade ago, I was diagnosed with advanced cancer. An expert pronounced that I had less than a 4% chance to live more than 2.5 years. That was a single story about my cancer. Fortunately, it was not the only story, or I would not be here more than 12 years later, happy and healthy, and sharing with you what I have learned about this journey of healing. My name is Dr. Samuel Mahaffy. My good friend Carrie calls me the walking miracle. Another friend refers to me as Lazarus, one who has returned from the dead. I once had a cancer marker, PSA, of 2,890. That number reflected cancer that had metastasized to nearly every bony area of my body. I share my journey of healing with you to bring hope to others, but also to bring forward a compelling case for integrative therapies and for relationship-centered care. Millions of viewers have now watched the TED Talk of the Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Adichie called The Dangers of a Single Story. Like Chimamanda, I journeyed from an African culture rich in storytelling to a Western culture. When Chimamanda first met her roommates in the U.S. university, their view of her was shaped by their singular picture of a black woman who had come from Africa. She describes it as a worldview that was patronizing and full of well-meaning pity. Stories are powerful. They actually shape and define the way we think about real things. And a stereotype is an example of a single story that can be dangerous because of its inaccuracy. But the danger of single stories is far greater than stereotypes that can be ugly and hurtful. The predominant diagnostic model of Western medicine is a story by which patients live and die every day in hospitals and clinics across the country. The danger of diagnosis is that it is a single story. It is a story that, in its very telling, has great consequences. When an expert diagnoses a patient with a disease and tells them how many months they may have to live, the patient and expert become together the central characters in a scripted story. It's a story that's not likely to have a happy outcome. That was much the singular story that was told to me when I was first diagnosed with advanced cancer. The storytelling of my urologist was of cancer as a disease that had invaded my body. If it was just cut out, my life might be extended. It was a huge risk, war, story of sorts, with a dramatic script that included knives and body parts being cut out of a patient, submitting to surgery by an expert in an operating arena. While I was invited to seek a second opinion, my charts were sent up to a surgical unit even before I had made a decision, in anticipation that I would accept the inevitability of this singular and very dangerous story. But I was born and raised in Eritrea, East Africa. My roots in this African culture led me to begin a deep and reflective search for other narratives, for alternative stories that might lead to life instead of death. I had great motivation to find alternative stories. I had 3 beautiful children I wanted to watch grow up, and relationships that I deeply valued. I was not ready to leave. I had work to do in this world, gifts and insights to share. I did not resonate with the singular story of my body being at war against an invasive cancer. I had spent a lifetime facilitating conflict transformation and supporting peacemaking in a culture that was steeped in metaphors of war and conflict. My search for alternative narratives led me to equally powerful stories, besides the dire and dark one first delivered to me by the doctor who first diagnosed my cancer. I remember there were about 7 voices with stories that became significant in my life and that woven together began to shape my healing from advanced cancer. Perhaps most important was the story of faith and healing that was central to the faith narrative I grew up with. It was one of the most powerful of the alternative stories. It gave me the audacity to believe in miracles in a society that gives little credence to miracles. Very simply, it was a story holding out that miracles are possible, and where there is life, there is hope. A number of alternative healers supported my internalized story that my body, which had allowed cancer to enter, also held great healing potential and wisdom. This narrative called me to listen for inner guidance, to be tuned in to what was happening in my body and spirit. From naturopathic and homeopathic physicians, I heard a story about the power of remedies and treatments that can change the body's signaling message around cancer in subtle and yet powerful ways. In counseling, I worked with painful issues from the past, including abuse, that I believe set me up for low self-esteem and made me more vulnerable to disease. Working with a body-mind therapist who had experienced with shamanic healers, I explored rituals for changing patterns from my ancestors that may have been a setup for hereditary disease. From my family, I recall the story of my Uncle Floyd, who had lived well for many decades with advanced cancer, keeping the cancer in check with integrative therapies. These rich narratives wove together into a rich fabric of alternative narratives to the singular story of my diagnosis and projected outcome. I truly believe that if I had been captivated by the single story first told to me by my urologist and accepted that as the single story about my cancer, I would not be alive today. Instead, it is the wisdom woven from multiple narratives and the multi-voiced perspective which brought me to an integrative path that included traditional and alternative medicine, science and faith, prayer and practice. Most importantly, these integrative narratives meant that this was not a journey that my doctor and I traveled alone, but it was a rich relational journey. I had great company on the pathway to healing. It included alternative practitioners, family members, and yes, angels and guides. I am convinced that in this notion of woven narratives, there is a powerful new paradigm for healthcare delivery. I share my story in the hope that it will encourage someone else faced with a frightening diagnosis. More than seeking a second opinion, this perspective is about deep relational listening, listening to the internal voices that speak to you, and listening to the wisdom of the relationships that we value most. Yes, listen well to the voice of your healthcare providers and respect their expertise. But listen also to alternative voices and perspectives. Ask questions. Questioning the predominant paradigm of disease and diagnosis, the collective perspective, and preferred treatment modalities will open up a rich and possibly life-saving multi-lens perspective. There is a compelling need for this new paradigm at a time when healthcare and the Affordable Care Act is front and central in the national conversation. Relationship-centered healthcare and integrative therapies are exciting, emerging alternatives to the diagnostic model, with all its dangers as a single story. What does this approach mean for healthcare? First, it calls healthcare systems and providers to be respectful of multiple voices, respectful of the wisdom not only of experts, but also the wisdom of patients and their stories. The narratives that shape the worldview of the patient and our collective worldview must be understood and appreciated. This new paradigm enhances an approach that is relational and respectful. It promotes the healing not only of the patient, but the well-being of patients, caregivers, medical staff, and the larger community. It honors relationships among patients, family members, staff, and the broader community. It promotes self-awareness, awareness of others, and a reflective approach that allows whole people to show up. Not just bodies with an invasive disease, and not just healthcare practitioners with a potential cure for those diseases. It looks not just at bodies, but at body, mind, and spirit, an integral being. It moves from a focus on diagnosis to a focus on prognosis. How are we together writing the next chapter in the journey of recovery? Recovery not only from cancers and degenerative diseases, but recovery from the broken relationships that lead inevitably to disease. We do have the capacity to hold and reflect on multiple stories. Our healthcare system and our culture often treats individuals as having capacity for only a single story. But as an associate of the Taos Institute, I am part of a community of scholars and practitioners exploring the way in which the power of multi-voice leads to healing and recognizing the dangers of a single story. I invite you to enter into this exploration with me. It is my experience that healing of the body and spirit is all about healing of relationships. Together, we can be instruments of healing in universes of damaged relationships. Together, we can do better. Thank you.